Okay, so today we have Christian on our call. And Christian, I'm going to have a go at pronouncing your surname. I meant to ask you this.
It's
It's
Szpilfogel.
Spilfogel.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's what we said. That's
Spilfogel.
exactly what we
Okay.
said.
Yeah. It's funny how not a lot of people can pronounce your surname in the industry, but yet as soon as you try to start saying it, everybody's like, oh, I know Christian. It's like they know it straight away. So welcome, Christian. This is going to be a really, really interesting conversation for our members. And just to remind everybody and to kind of give you a little bit of background, Leadership in Life, we developed this because we are super passionate about helping the individual first, how to lead themselves, recognize self-awareness, recognize habits in themselves that they can really improve on, which will naturally bring them to be a better leader of other people. And we really believe that. And the community itself is really driven by the fact that not many people get the access to hear other people's vulnerable stories. And a lot of people who become successful don't even share the fears that they had to overcome. So we don't hear a lot of that, and that's really our goal and our mission, and what we're trying to bring to this membership and this group. So thank you so much for your time today. We're super excited to get into this. But before we do, I'm going to read out your bio. So Christian is an experienced real estate investor and entrepreneur with a background in various executive positions in both private and public technology corporations, and is focused on investments in real estate and tech startups. Currently serving as the founder and chief investment officer of the Aliferous Group.
Mhm.
I'm getting good at pronouncing. He has proven to be a thriving real estate investor and bargaining holdings in multi-unit residential and commercial properties. Learning from his own prosperity, he believes in giving back to the community by spreading his knowledge and helping others develop their own personal wealth strategy to success. He serves on a number of real estate focused boards, including the Ottawa Real Estate Investors Organization, the Eastern Ontario Landlords Organization, Rental Housing Canada. He is also on the board of a number of startup and young companies, several of which have already successfully exited. Wow, that is quite the bio.
Very impressive bio.
It is a very impressive bio.
Thank you.
So to get started, we always start with this core founding question, and we want to get to know a little bit more about you. So can you walk us through your career path so far, where you started off in your career to the steps to where you are now? And is it what you envisioned when you first started off, or did it evolve unexpectedly along the journey?
Oh, yeah, I'm absolutely not where I thought I was going to be. And I'd say that throughout my career points, I go like, how did I get to this point? Right. But life is full of twists and turns as we go. I did my degree in physics, right? And so, I'm not going to go back to my younger life where I thought I'd eventually be like an astronaut or something like that. I think everybody has those dreams. But I was originally, I did physics with the intent of actually working in places like Fermi Labs or CERN on subatomic physics, etc. So um, I did one stint at a public research institution and realized that public service was not for me. I won't get into the details of it, but I'm a very ambitious person, right? So it was, I found it a bit constraining for what I was doing and who I am. So I shifted more into technology, and I had a huge interest in networking technologies. And then joined a company called Bell Northern Research, right? I knew nothing about them. I knew they were in a networking and they had the word research in the name of their firm. And I said, sounds fun. It was just a co-op term at the time in university. And so I ended up there and then ultimately, and it's a cute little story how I ended up there on a permanent basis. They needed someone to do a particular engineering feature within one of their products, but they didn't have the people to do it. And I volunteered myself to the director and boldly stated to him, I said, well, I'll tell you what, if you make me a member of the scientific staff and give me a leave of absence to finish the last term at my university, I said, I'll do this for you. I'll extend my term here to do it. And I remember his words very clearly as he stared at me. He said, is that so? So in the end, though, he was actually quite good about it. And there was a precedence issue because I didn't yet have my degree, so I couldn't be a member of scientific staff. So he ended up giving me a raise and a job offer instead, which was fine. And it was all down to negotiation in terms of what I needed and everything, but he was actually excellent to deal with. And it was a win-win because there was hiring freeze that following May, and I was one of about three people in a company of about 20,000 that actually had a job offer. So, that was just an example of being bold on the things that you need to do, right? That kind of worked out well. So I was in that career and progressed through management ranks, ultimately moving over to a more nimble company later on, where I ended up becoming ultimately the chief architect and then also the general manager of about $500 million of revenue. And that's a general manager from an overall product R&D and sales perspective. So it's often general managers are defined as salespeople, right? So I had the whole kit and caboodle profit and loss. So that was actually very useful. But one of the things that I discovered along the way when you're in private industry is there really aren't concepts such as pension plans. And so what I was doing on the side, I tried stock market and so on like that. Really didn't work out well for me. I said, there's no way I'm going to retire in the lifestyle I want doing, buying mutual funds. So I started investing in real estate after I had an inclination to do it anyways, but an older gentleman who had made a career shift from being a teacher into real estate said that he'd never, that was the best investment in his life. And I said, okay, it sounds like a worth a try. And so I started investing as a sort of side hustle, if you will, to my main business, which of course in technology was always very demanding. And the hobby began to grow, right? And at one point, I was starting to mull over whether I needed to make a full transition now to investing in real estate, which had gone from being a hobby to really quite being a business. And this is where life throws you some twists and turns. My older daughter, who had significant mental health issues, had reached a point where, my wife at the time couldn't handle it anymore. And so I had to take over. And that forced the decision at the time for the transition into, owning and running a business where I could call the shots in terms of my time freedom that was required so that I could put focus and energy into my daughter. And we're still on the journey. It's been about 8 or 9 years now, right? That there, she's far, far better. Just to be sure, I want to give people a level of comfort. But it also enabled me to make this transition into the investment business, and so I own the company, and I ended up here, and you can kind of see it's been a little bit of a convoluted path. So.
That's amazing. Well, I'm really glad that your daughter's doing good because I do recall when I met you a couple of years back, I think it was about 3 years ago now. And I remember you introducing your daughter that she was working in the business now with you. So,
Well, there's two. So the one
two,
that
right?
is
Okay.
actually is my right-hand person in the business, and she's part of my succession plan. It's my older daughter, and I'm not 100% sure if she was at that seminar at
Maybe
the
not
time. She
then.
may
Yeah.
have been. So,
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear she's doing good. So that's amazing. Um, I do want to touch back on the fact when you were talking about the bold move that stood out to me. Because one of my follow-up questions here was there ever a time on your journey where you had to develop a mindset or a skill that really kind of projected you, that you didn't think it was like anything at the time, maybe, but it turned out to be, a pivotal moment? And that stood out to me, that piece where you went in and you was very bold. So just kind of to add to that, I guess, was that something that that you was naturally in you, or was that something that you realized you had to be to get to the level that you wanted to be straight away in your career? Because it sounds like you went very high up very quickly in your career.
Mhm. I did. I've always been ambitious, but never ambitious to the point of being silly, right? So some people are ambitious and they're political animals, right? Not my style at all. I've always wanted to make sure everything was on merit, but it wasn't just, I just followed my interests, honestly. So as I moved through senior manager up the management ranks and so on, it wasn't, more of the same, but at another level. It was often, it might be initially a movement upwards, but then there'd be a lateral to another area of the business. And that's because I'm just insatiably curious. I love learning. And I find if I stay in a particular job for 2 or 3 years, that's about as long as I can take it before I can do it great, but I'm so bored, right, that I just can't continue doing it anymore. So I need new challenges. And I've had the benefit of good leadership that would recognize not just what skills I bring to the table and where my interests lie, but were also very interested in helping me in my career development and advancement. But, at the same time, you also have to be bold enough to go and take those opportunities when they present to you. And often you're in a situation, or often you'd be moved into a role. You sit there and go like, I don't know if I can do this, right? And it doesn't matter how confident you are in your own skills, right? Like maybe it's a bit of a Dunning-Kruger kind of situation, but you kind of sit there and the more you know about it, the less capable you think you're going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I tend to have that issue, but inevitably that sparks the fire in me to really make sure I can succeed and put a lot of energy into that success. And that's always been part of the fun. I like the level of risk that brings, and it gives me the energy to do what I need to do. But in every situation like that, you often feel like you're an imposter in the role, right? To quote the that ideology. But and I felt that strongest when I made that transition from the corporate world to, building my own company, being in the real estate world, right? Because there were two things changing there. One is my identity in the corporate world. And I had a big reputation in the Ottawa area in the tech sector, and I was leaving that all behind. That was a personal identity that I had, and it was a big change. And I have to redevelop that type of reputation in the real estate world and the investment world. And you're often, especially in the new community, you're hearing a lot of people talk about terminology and things that they're doing. And you just sit there and go like, do I really fit into this place? Right? Like these guys talk a big game. They just sound really impressive and everything like that. And it took me a year or two to realize that, in fact, um, I wasn't the imposter, they were. Because a lot of these people that were talking a big game had actually not executed anything. They were just talking a big game, right?
Yeah.
And the whole time that I was actually executing and doing amazing things, suddenly realized later on as things become clearer and you get to know who everybody is, you suddenly realize, no, no, I'm okay, I'm good. So, but it's an unsettling thing on one side to feel like you're the imposter, and at the same time, I've given up the identity of my previous career.
Yeah, yeah.
We can completely understand that right now.
Totally
Yeah.
understand.
I'm sure.
So one of the next questions that I've got here, Christian, it kind of relates to that a little bit, but it's the leadership at life. We talk a hell of a lot about self-awareness. We notice there's thinking, there's reactions, and all these different kind of patterns. Can you share a time when you had this fear? I think you've touched on it a bit there, of self-doubt or emotional challenges, and how you managed to deal with them.
Yeah. And the during my corporate career, there was always a little bit of that, but it really was, and I touched on it just before the question was when I made that transition into real estate, that was probably the biggest one in terms of uncertainty. Because the other element you may not be aware of is that what made it more difficult to make that transition is that I was the only income in a single income family, right? And so there's the fear naturally of saying, okay, well, I'm giving up this rather good income, which I now realize were just golden handcuffs in reality. Because, as an entrepreneur, I'm doing far better than I did in my corporate world. But at the time, you don't know that, right? There's that level of uncertainty. I've always had the entrepreneur bug before that, but I had the safety of a corporate environment to do it, right? So it was all sort of a very safe bubble. And so making that transition was difficult. As I mentioned, leaving the identity behind, the former identity, and was difficult because you tend to identify with, for yourself, right? Your own internal, compass, if you will, is like, well, this is who I am, right? I am, a technology corporate executive, right? And you define your life around that role. But then when you make a fundamental transition like this, there's a little bit of, just trying to figure out exactly who you are now, right? And of course, you are who you are, right? But you kind of want to define yourself in some way. There's security in that. And so changing into the real estate side of it, um, because of my daughter's situation, it forced the springboard that I needed to take. I was going to do it anyway, but it just happened faster. And it really kind of motivated me to do the right thing. But the first thing you could do, because I was single income, is, well, now I have to secure income. So now, it's not a hobby anymore. I have to figure out how I turn this into a business to support my daughters going through school, and all the hobbies and everything that they were doing. And, we still had a mortgage to pay and all these kinds of things were still, the money still needed to be there. So there was a lot of focus on structuring things to make sure that we had the safety net. And then, and while I was doing that, it was two-pronged. It was one, creating that safety net. The other was trying to build the empire, if you will. And you have to do both at the same time. You can't do one after the other. And you're trying to define yourself and you're trying to figure out, can I pull this off? And, how long is this money going to last before I figure it out? So it was,
Yeah.
it was stressful and fun all at the same time.
Yeah, but it is so true. I can totally relate to when you leave a corporate world because you have that identity in that role and people know you as that person in that role. And then when you move into real estate, it's like you're somebody in real estate, but all of that reputation and all that personality that you've built, also now you just kind of stepped away from it.
We talk about this a lot, don't we? It's like, who am I now?
I know.
What am I known as now? It's weird.
Yeah.
And then when you're talking to people, we're still in a position where we do reflect and tell people about our past a lot and what we did in the corporate world, because you're still kind of holding on to that credibility when you're entering a new era of your life. So it's definitely
we're trying to build credit in his new role. There's a lot of credit in his previous role.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And certainly in my new role that I went into, there wasn't the ability to transfer as much of that credibility. So most people don't know about my corporate past and the things that I would do there. And most of the people from my past were just kind of curious about what I was doing.
Yeah.
So they follow me and I get calls every once in a while said, I was thinking to invest in real estate. Can I give you some money? Right. So I think that's probably the only advantage that I have is that the career that I had, those people typically do have some money. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Can I just dive back? I'm sorry, I'm probing back to a time that you've probably really shifted past now because you've kind of come through this, this big journey and now, you're fully in real estate and you're owner of that company. But if I just take it back to your early days for some of our members that I've got in mind, were there any kind of like confidence issues back at the, like I say issues, but back at, in the early days. And sorry, I keep kind of like honing in on that conversation where you went in and you were so bold and so confident. But was there anything in the early days that actually came to light with you that you were aware of and you had to get over it? And you might have got over it very quickly. And when I think about this, I think about like public speaking fears, like you've touched on imposter syndrome a little bit, fears, or any kind of self-pleasing, or any kind of scratchy elements that you noticed in your personality early in your career that you were aware of that you had to work on.
Yeah, there's lots. I think you've seen me speak on big stages now, and I've certainly done stuff on the worldwide stages with thousands of people in the audience. And that's not where I started. I remember the first time I did a presentation, it was just to some of my colleagues, right? And I was so nervous, right? And but I did it anyway, right? And with practice, certainly in the early days, I was a terrible speaker. I didn't have structure, I didn't have training, I just did it ad hoc. And I figured I could continue to do it that way. But I later developed more discipline in terms of how to speak. So not just the confidence to be on stage, because there's lots of people on stage that are terrible speakers. And I wouldn't
And they're
say,
confident as well for some reason.
what's that?
And they can be confident for some
Oh
reason.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
still terrible.
exactly. But I've had the privilege of watching a lot of really very good speakers and then trying to learn from what they're doing, etc., and then try to improve my craft because I do like public speaking. So there was those kinds of things, but there's other stuff that's less obvious, perhaps, such as, okay, I might have the confidence in myself, right? But now, am I sure that my colleagues have the confidence in me as well, right? So I'd be a little bit concerned about that, maybe a little bit paranoid about that at times too. So, I tended to perhaps overthink that side of things a little bit and then maybe over position myself. And it's really a fine touch, right? Like you need to be bold enough so that people recognize you and you're not just, in the background and nobody ever sees you. But at the same time, you don't want to overdo it in the sense that you become obnoxious, right? And I'm not sure that I ever was obnoxious, but at times I felt like I might have been. So, and a lot of that is just confidence in where you fit. Maybe it's back to imposter syndrome, etc. But it's something that I certainly had to learn early in my career to make sure that that was in check, right? So that I struck the right balance in that. And I might almost describe it as a form of insecurity as well. So, you don't always feel like you're secure in exactly where you are, who you are, no matter how, if you think, well, I'm good at this, right? But I'm not confident my colleagues see me as good at this, right? And so there's always that little bit of insecurity around it. And I would honestly say that there's always some level of insecurity in the things that we do. And I think we need moments of calibration to figure out whether or not you're as good as you think you are or not as bad as you think you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Wow.
So I got another question here, Chris, and I love asking this question, but when you look back over your journey, which habits or mindset or just way of thinking has had the biggest long-term positive effect on your career as an entrepreneur and in the corporate world?
Um, Boy, there's probably a lot, right? And I'm going to start with where my strengths lie, I guess, is that I've been able to hone a vision and build strategy. So I'm fine with sitting down and understanding the big plan and understanding the steps I need to get to that big plan. I wouldn't say that I was doing that specifically in my career for my own career plan, but I certainly was with respect to the products we were building at the time or the portfolio I'm building right now. I have a good vision and a good idea of where we need to be. But there were things that were really quite important that I was not good at. So structure, process, discipline, right? I like the abstract. I thrive in the abstract. So give us a problem that we have to try and figure out. I can figure that out. Once it's defined 80% to 90%, I say, okay, someone else can run with it from here. Right. But when as you get into senior management, especially as a general manager, et cetera, process becomes very important. Discipline around the financials becomes important. And those weaknesses that I had, for survival basis, I learned to do it. So it wasn't that I said, oh, I better be good at this, right? Because it's necessary for my job. It was like, if I don't learn this, right, I'm going to be really bad at my job. So it's more fear driven, if you will. And but it was a really necessary skill. So the financial disciplines that I learned along the way in order to make sure that I was successful in my earlier career are skills that are fundamentally important in what I do now. And understanding how business works, how profits work, how the levers, and they're not complicated. So a lot of times people say, "Oh, well, that just sounds like it's really hard." It really isn't, right? But and as you guys know, as entrepreneurs yourself, it really isn't, but you need the discipline to do it. And if you don't have that natural discipline from within you, some people are just really good at that, right? And I envy those people that are really good at that. I have to work at it. And I've done it long enough now that it's natural for me, right? But I wasn't born with it. So.
That's interesting. I like that. I think the company that I worked for many years, the word there was ambiguity. That's always seemed to work in ambiguity, and that just reminded me of that. And I was kind of like a little bit flip on the other side. I craved to create processes from the ambiguity.
Yeah.
So now for me, and building our business, it really is hard work to every day be working in ambiguity and constantly trying to figure new things out and new ways of working. And we're just getting to a point now where things are getting set up and it's the other way. We're getting processes in place and then that gets to our comfort. But I think once you kind of get to that level of comfort, you can find the other pieces a little bit easier then. So it really is, comfort is on the other side of fear and the other side of hard things. It really is, because once you kind of get over that new skill that you need to learn, that's where you start becoming more confident.
And you're bringing up another good point, Amy, which is the ability to pivot, right, and adapt to that change. And um, I'll give you a personal example. So I own a number of commercial assets, including office space. Um, in 2020, we had a little thing called COVID, right? That resulted in lockdowns. And
Just a minor thing.
yep, people weren't really looking for office space that year.
No.
So you're sitting there going, well, I can just kind of say, well, I really hope this is over soon, or maybe I can find somebody that actually needs office space during this kind of crisis when everybody else has got tons of office space, or maybe I can reduce my rates. But you had to be adaptable. So we took a different approach. We said, okay, well, we've got this space. What can we do with it? What are the new circumstances? What's the big problem here? And everybody was working from home, and a lot of people hated it because the kids were home, the dogs were home, the spouse was home, and it was almost impossible to get work done. And they just wanted some place to go. So we took a lot of that office space and we cut it up into smaller pieces, gave everybody individual offices, and they would come in there when they wanted some peace time, right? And it ended up actually increasing our revenue per square foot by about 50%.
Wow.
Right? So COVID kind of helped us out in that situation. But it's the ability to, and we didn't know that it was going to be successful, but we looked at it as we didn't have any choice. So we said we have to find another way to generate revenue. And so that's the kind of thing we did. And it really points to the fact that in changing circumstance, don't just assume that what was working in the past is going to work in the future. Business is dynamic, the economy is dynamic. Donald Trump is dynamic, right? So, so things just happen and you have to just adjust, right? And go on. And now when I was in the corporate world, there's safety in numbers, right? So you kind of figure, okay, we'll figure this all out together. When you're leading your company, right? While you do want to leverage the skills and the the capabilities of your team, and to be fair, they came up with a lot of these answers. It's personal for you. You own the company. You got to make sure it's successful. You have to be able to inspire people to find the new ways that we have to do things, and recognize that we're going to have to break some things in order to get to where we need to be. And that's a big difference when you own a company versus when you're working in a company.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Did you actually turn the office space back to the open space, or do you still hold some in the smaller cubicle size?
We still have people who do that. It's not as popular as it was during COVID, and then we found tenants who actually wanted enclosed offices rather than open concept, so they still lease out large areas like that. So that didn't turn out. In the end, it's still quite useful. Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about how we learn from other people, which is really about, what this membership is all about, hearing other people's stories. We truly believe that that is the best way to learn. So realizing that a lot of other people have the same fear in us, and hearing the tips and tricks from other people and how that really helps them. Was there any moments for you where you might have been observing somebody else, whether it was a positive experience or a difficult one, that you took from that and it fundamentally changed how you approached your self-leadership and leading of other people?
Yeah, I think so, and maybe not in the way that you're thinking it might, but perhaps I don't know. So I had the honor of working in sort of a technology group. So the chairman is you've heard of the concept of a serial entrepreneur. This gentleman is a parallel entrepreneur, right? He's starting up 5 to 10 businesses at a time. And the fellow named Terry Matthews, who's a big tech entrepreneur based out of Ottawa, he's got hundreds of companies that he's founded. And one of the things that, he and I grew close. So he became a mentor to me. And just because we were doing a lot of work together, so he'd often call me in from, the company that I was in, and he would want me to help work with a lot of his younger companies and startups. And so through that, and then further affiliation through that, I became very curious about all these young entrepreneurs and seeing people just starting with nothing, right? Coming right out of university and starting their first business with mentorship. And we would help provide them mentorship in one way or another. And Terry was the primary in terms of creating that mentorship for people and learning to, all these people would work for almost nothing, right? But they had equity in their business, right? So if they could build the business, they made money. So it was intriguing being in the corporate world and seeing all these entrepreneurs. And I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't really understand the concept. It just wasn't the way I was raised. And so seeing all these entrepreneurs, some of them fresh out of school, others that a friend of mine, a guy named Bruce Linton, you might know him because he used to own Canopy Growth, right? The big marijuana producer. So I met Bruce through the technology side of things. Canopy was his 10th startup, right? Just to put into context, he had 9 that were reasonably successful before. Nothing, no home runs, right? And Canopy was his 10th. So I was watching these entrepreneurs really taking the chances and doing what they need to do. And I realized that after looking at them, it's like, I can do that. Right. So there's nothing wild and woolly about what they're doing. And I understand conceptually how they're going about it. But it also gave me the confidence that I could do it because if you see people do it, right, and you understand what they're doing, suddenly you go like, there's nothing weird here. I can do that. Right. So then I went and did it. Right. But yeah, but I think that was probably, there's all kinds of good examples of leaders, above me or even below me, right? That, taught me good skills and so on. But to me, that was probably on the, top level scale was probably one of the most influential things in terms of me making the transition that I needed to make.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then from like leaders that you've worked with, Christian, that have not left a nice taste in the mouth, what's the kind of thing that's jumped out that you've instantly recognized that their leadership skills are probably not the best?
So I think we've all had bad managers, haven't we?
Yeah.
And so the biggest issue I had with bad managers is uh, my tolerance for it, right? And if they weren't in my direct reporting structure, so if let's leave out the people that reported to me, right? And just think about, people above me, right? Or my colleagues. If it was my colleagues, I tended to try and kind of, because I always had the interests of the company first, right? And the team first. So I was always a team player and I'd always help out people that I felt were not, necessarily producing, but I wouldn't whine and complain about it. But if I had a boss that was incompetent, right, and I was reporting into them, it was insufferable, right? And they may recognize the skills that you bring to the table, but they would be making bad decisions, right? And it was going to reflect on you. And those were really very difficult moments. And I'm not sure I always dealt with it well. So I've never gone and said to my boss, you're an idiot, right? Although I felt like it.
That close.
That close, but I kind of tried to yeah. But ultimately, I would just find a way to get away from them, right? Because and it's not that the work wouldn't be interesting that I was working on. It's just from my own mental health perspective, I couldn't deal with it. And and there was lots of other good opportunities around it. So, and then what you find out is other people kind of really, oh yeah, that guy's really a problem, right? And then eventually they figure it out. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's always amazing how much a work environment really does rotate around a good leader or a bad leader.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I've had lots of really good leaders, and to be fair, so, like anything, you've got the 80-20 rule, right? And you got 20% of the leadership are exceptional, right? And really very good at what they do. And part of that is not just the leadership of the business, but it's the people as well, and inspire the people. And then you've got the bottom 20%, right? That really shouldn't be there. And then everybody else in between is competent and decent, right? And fine to work with, right?
Yeah. So on that note about influencing and leading others, was there ever a moment when you realized that how you might have been showing up, probably in your corporate career more, how you were showing up internally, that could have been negatively affecting people around you? And how did you recognize that and that something needed to change?
I'd like to say that there was a lot of that, but there wasn't. In that capacity was one where I adapted quickly, right? So if I care about the people around me, right, is really at the core, and I do now, and I always have. So I wouldn't do something to negatively impact other people per se. But I would often find ways to help them out, right? So, and to try and figure out, okay, how, if somebody was struggling, for example, right? I wouldn't take them down. I wouldn't try and belittle them or anything like that. In fact, I would try and figure out, okay, well, how can I get them to where they need to be, right? And if they couldn't get there, that wasn't my issue, but it wasn't for lack of me trying to help out. And I help out complete strangers, not just colleagues. I'll help out complete strangers that are kind of struggling with things and to help them get over the next hump. And I'd say that was part of what helped me in the transition to helping my daughter with her mental health and addiction issues at the time, was that focus. But it really that experience with her actually heightened that a lot more. So I grew a lot more empathy, right? So, I would say I had decent empathy before, maybe not great, but okay. And then with my daughter's experience, I began to really appreciate the struggles that others might be having, right? Whether it's in skills or whether it's in mental health, whether it's physical health, whatever it may be. And so it changed my attitude around a lot of things there, right? And so my natural tendency, and my partner, she's actually very similar to it, but sometimes she's like, you got to focus on your stuff too, right? And so I know, but this person needs help, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice problem,
Yeah, it's a good trait
yeah,
to
it's a
have.
good trait, yeah, definitely. So, right, do you wanna,
I will. So what we do whenever we have as guest speakers, and we always have a question that we ask as members. Give us your questions, and we'll try and ask as many as we can. And we got one today from one of the members, Charlene. And the question is, what is an area of development you've had personally, and how did you overcome it?
we might have touched on this a little bit.
We may have, yeah.
Yeah.
So historically or currently?
Currently.
Yeah, either, yeah.
So from a skills perspective, one thing I'm going through right now is everything I've built with my own money. Okay, so, and I didn't, as lofty as that sounded as a career, right? I had a little bit of money when I transitioned, but it wasn't a ton, but it was enough of a seed to grow what I was doing. And I've been very clever about how to grow the size of our business. But one of the things now is I want to go to another level again, right? And now you can't do that without raising capital. So now I'm at a point where I'm going, okay, I've had a lot of people ask me, well, I'd like to invest with you, right? And because they're busy, they're doctors, lawyers, whatever it happens to be. And they're busy with their own businesses, right? So I've always said no, always. And I've seen a lot of people, and the backbone of a lot of real estate transactions is capital raise, and I've never done it. So I have to learn it. And so I'm literally going through the process. I was working through things with my strategic accountant and my tactical accountant yesterday, just to work through, okay, well, how are we going to structure this, and how are we going to do this, and how do I ensure that the investors are properly taken care of, and how do I interact with them, and what's the right structure for them, and how long are they going to stay into the deal, and what's my role, and what are other people's roles. So I have to figure all this out, stuff that when it's your own thing, it doesn't matter, right? It's like you have to have the structure, and you obviously have to plan for the money and have all the discipline around that. But you are self-sufficient at the same time, and that, if I need to take a week off and do something else, that's my problem. That's my business. Now that I have to be responsible for other people's money, I have to ensure that the disciplines that I've built to this point are appropriate for me to be able to, properly care for what they're doing and ensure that I, maximize the return in a way that they need to. And then learning all of the processes around this stuff, right? And there's a lot to it. Conceptually, it's easy, right? But when you're dealing with all the structures that can go in, all the tax implications that can happen, all the legal implications that can happen with it, the requirements around the securities commissions, et cetera, like that, all these pieces have to be knitted together. And it's not insurmountable, but it's new for me. So,
Yeah, I find it fascinating, all that side of the capital raising and that next level, because it really is, like you say, you're taking on such a responsibility of looking after the investors. But the fact that you recognize that you're the kind of person that does it right. So that's the key.
it's really important for me. And I've developed a lot of confidence in myself because I've been able to manage my own business and my own money for quite a few years now. And I really transitioned from corporate to the investment world in 2017. So I had a hobby before that, but it really, flipped in 2017. And so I've had what, 8, almost 9 years right around this. And so I have confidence I know how to execute in general on the actual deals. But to your point, Amy, it's the responsibility now for the money. And like I said, I've got empathy that I've developed, at a keener level. I just want to make sure that, some of these people are my friends, right? And I just want to make sure that they're kept whole. I don't want to screw this up, right? And that puts an awful lot of onus on me. I'm not cavalier about it. And yet you see in the industry so much where people have this false sense of ability, right? Where they're, okay, you've not even done one investment yet, and yet you're going to raise money from people to do this. And yes, there is inherent risk when people do investments, and a lot of people need to do more due diligence around who they're investing their money with. But at the same time, like, how can you possibly have the skills to pull this off properly, right? That's a high risk aspect of it. And I don't want to be associated with all that, right? So,
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And I think that touches a lot on what we were kind of saying here about our leadership program. Is, in order to be able to do that, you have to have the core fundamentals of leadership. You are going to lead these investors to where they want to be. You're going to be the visionary to get them where they want to be. To your point, what you mentioned there, Chris, and unfortunately, there is people in this kind of arena, let's say, that have not got them skills, that are not looking at it from an empathy standpoint, or the communication skills are not good to get the investors on board and then deliver on what they've promised. So just to be able to do that, to be able to get the team together and raise the capital to execute on the promise is the core for what we believe is the core fundamental of leadership.
yeah.
And I think I was going to ask on that as well, Christian. We don't normally kind of go into the industry specifics, but I'm going to do a little bit because I'd like to know your thoughts on the importance of leadership in the real estate world. Just in general, because we from what we've seen, it is a big area that's missed. I don't know whether leadership and the word leadership gets left in organizations, at corporations, and it's a fundamental key piece that we see is not learned in the real estate world.
It comes across in a few ways. Of course, it matters in the real estate world as well. I have a team of people, right? It's not just me. So the people that work for me, it's important in terms of how I keep them involved in the business as well. So I borrow a lot from what I had in my previous career, but the team, we have a monthly team meeting where we literally go through everything. I show them exactly what I'm working on and, where things stand and where the finances are and who the lenders are and the investors, et cetera. And what the priorities are in terms of what assets need to be stabilized first and why and when and all these kinds of things. And they're participating in it, but I also get their situation. So it means that we end up working as a team overall in order to achieve success. Otherwise, they're kind of running blind. And one of the people in my organization tended to want to be, she tends to like to control things. And so, I'll say, okay, well, what does Logan think about this particular situation? And she'll say, well, I'll talk to him about it, right? And I'll get him to do this. And there was always that level of indirection. I said, no. I said, look, we're not a huge team, right? Like we have to all be in sync here, right? And we have to ensure that that things there. So egos aside, this is how we have to actually execute. So there's always that aspect in terms of the involvement, but it's also making sure that the people that work for you develop the right set of skills as you go. And my preference is always to try and train and get people to where they need to be, but sometimes people just don't fit in the organization, after you've given it a good shot. I had a boss that once said, if someone doesn't appear to be working out right at the beginning, get rid of them fast, right? Because it only gets harder. And I think there's some truth to that. to some degree, but at the same time, if I think it's just rough edges, right, and the person has the ability to get to where they need to be, I don't mind investing time to get them there.
Yeah.
And it's always a very funny skill there. The other dimension of leadership in this world is, I think you guys have a perception of who I am, right, in the real estate world. And I've never had to raise capital until recently, and I never had any intention to raise capital until recently. My ambitions just got bigger, the projects got bigger. So now that's the next lever, but it just wasn't a part of the original plan. Yet I try to be out there to help define what good should be, right? And so I'm very active in social media. I'm very active out in the real estate community. And a lot of it is just to kind of help people, because what I'm doing is not special. At least I don't believe it is. And I think a lot of people can actually execute on the kinds of things I'm doing, and being self-sufficient and growing wealth and having a comfortable retirement, or taking care of the people that they love around them to do better. And so I like going out and kind of helping to show and set a good example for, what you could do. Because a lot of people, like at the Ottawa Real Estate Investment Organization, OREO as we call it, we have about just under 400 members there. And we usually have an attendance of somewhere between 120 and 150 at our monthly meetings. I don't gain anything financially for doing that at all. It's a volunteer group. But I get a lot of emotional value out of it, to see other people go have their aha moments, right? To take that next step and move forward. And I think we all have a bit of that in all of us, to be able to provide leadership to others without necessarily gaining any other benefit other than helping someone out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
That's an amazing piece to finish on. I would just like the thing that just stood out to me then was the fact that was the word integrity, which is one of our pillars. Like, we look at 4 pillars: self-awareness, empathy, communication, and ethics, like integrity. And I think that that's the key piece for you. You can see, obviously, integrity is just a natural piece of you. It's grounded in you. And I think, and then when you've got empathy on that as well, and you've learned how to communicate and understand yourself, that's when you really start to progress to be a really good leader. And that's the piece that is so important, the integrity piece, that, if ever you're going to be trying to be self-aware on something, it's how integral you're being in everything that you do. So
that's right, in every aspect of the way you execute, because it does build trust, right? It's sort of an indirect benefit of it. So and like I said, I've never done it to work on trust or to, do anything. I do it because I do it. Right?
Yeah.
It's just how I'm wired. Right. But it sometimes will have other benefits, right, that you might not expect. Right. I've had a lot of unexpected benefits from just treating people properly and well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, Christian, this has been brilliant, and I'm sorry we've taken so much of your time up as well. But is there any last thoughts, any last words that you want to say to our members? And if they ever needed help with anything, if your businesses can help, you're more than welcome to put a plug in there as well, if you like.
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of help people along the way. And I have to, value my time, and I have to be careful about that, because I don't want like 1,000 people showing up in my inbox. But I'm always, happy to help guide people and get them in the right direction. So, feel free to reach out to me. Any of your members are quite welcome to reach out to me. And if I can kind of help them along the way, I'm more than happy to do so.
Incredible.
Perfect.
Thank you
Excellent.
so much, Christian. That
Yes.
is amazing. What an absolutely brilliant interview.
Yes, thank you so much for your time and insight, and just being so vulnerable to take on board the passion that we have for leadership and explain it in the way that you did.
Yeah.